So I remembered to turn the microphone on this morning, so hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, let me know. I have an excellent ear doctor. We're going to pick up where we left off in our last study at the end of chapter 34. Anybody remember what the main theme of chapter 34 was? Yeah, we had a couple of the sons of Jacob pretty much go in and wipe out all the men of a town. I'm not sure that wasn't the entire nation. What was Jacob's attitude towards that? Was that something that he condoned or contrived? No, he was not happy about that at all. In fact, he says, "You've made me stink because of that." It was rather a big event for them to do that. We're going to pick up in 35. I put in here, I'm letting Harry do the review synopsis lines. That way we remain consistent. If you want an opportunity to review these or keep them for your notes, the material is on our website for download. So we're all the way up to 34. We're going to pick up in 35. We're going to outline this briefly, and then we're going to get into the questions. So who wrote the book of Genesis? Moses. Okay. Was he an eyewitness account? No. So he had the help of the Holy Spirit to make sure that all of these recordings are accurate. All of them are there for a purpose. And what is that purpose, as we're told? To teach us, to be a tutor for us, and to lead us to whom? Okay, Christ. Following on the theme of our early worship this morning, everything that we are learning and everything that is recorded for us is to bring us to the understanding of the nature of God, the complexity of God, the love of God, the severity of God, but his eternal purpose in providing a Savior through the lineage of the Jews that leads to Jesus. So in chapter 35, we have God talking to Jacob and telling him to go to Bethel and dwell there. It seems as though the things that are recorded for us here during this period of time, God has a very often interaction with these people. He tells them where to go and where to live and what to do. He tells them how to name their children, and he changes the names of a lot of the people that we have recorded here. He is very interactive in this lineage. So God blesses Jacob and changes his name to Israel. Does anybody remember what Israel means? Harry? Israel? Okay. Anything else is God, right? So I think it would be a little presumptuous for him to take on this change of his name had God not given it to him, because Jacob was while a name of honor with him somewhat, it means the what now? Remember? It's like the deceiver or the supplanter, and he has a bit of that reputation. So Rachel dies during this chapter, and she gives birth but dies in the process to the last of the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel meaning not the nation yet, but the man. And then Isaac dies at Hebron, and he's 180. Anybody have any Anything I missed on chapter 35?
I think it's interesting that God tells Jacob to get rid of all the foreign gods or foreign idols that they had with them before he tells them to go to Bethel. And I kind of wondered, so what was their condition before that? They followed God, so why did they have all these other foreign gods or idols with them?
Yeah, I found it rather interesting that Rachel was the one who actually took her father's gods, or whatever the token was that represented their gods, and was conspiratorial in hiding them from Laban. So I'm sure, as we know from our teachings in the Old Testament, that God is a jealous God, and he does not take kindly to people assigning his benevolence and his love and his care for the nation to some piece of material. So this is another one of those times, or maybe the start of the times, when he is expecting the people that follow him to get rid of other gods. Is that different than today? It's no different than today. Now, you may not carry around a gold or silver trinket that you consider to be your God in your pocket or around your neck, but there are many things in our lives that can take preeminence over our servitude of the Father and of his Son. Scott?
Well, we've got, recorded some of the most righteous men in history, and even they have a hard time teaching their kids and keeping their kids on the right path. And it's just, and the problems that causes so often within the family, we have examples of it throughout the Bible, and just how important it is to do everything you can to keep your family safe.
And why did they have so much trouble with that? Influence of the nations that surrounded them. I have a map that we'll get to in a minute, but this area of the 12 tribes was surrounded by the heathens, and God specifically told them not to intermarry with them and all of that, and yet when that happened, we have recorded for us an understanding that can dilute and adulterate even the best of characters. And we're still told about that today. In fact, that might be one of the most important teachings of the up and down relationship between God and the nation of Israel, is the fact that when they leave him, he punishes them and brings them back. And we see his attitude towards that. Okay, let's go to chapter 36. Now this one, Harry put me to shame, so I decided I'd add a few pretty pictures into my presentation as well. So this actually is a genealogy from Noah out. These are interesting to study. I don't expect anyone to memorize them. In fact, I threatened Scott with having him read chapter 36. But the bottom line is that the information that's recorded there is for us to study. Some of it is the lineage of Christ. Some of it is not. But what we have here with Rachel dying, giving birth to Benjamin, is the completion of the 12 sons of Israel, who will become the 12 nations, Levi and Manasseh being a little different. But the chart up here, a little difficult to read, but it does help to clear the fog a little bit, because when I start reading through who begat whom, I get a little confused. And sometimes the names are the same one generation to the next, or the names get changed. This one specifically deals with the 12 tribes of Israel and which wife or maidservant. I'm not real sure they're given the name of concubine, but the maidservants that Jacob takes as wives, and exactly what order the 12 are born. First, she has Reuben, and then Simeon, and then Levi and Judah. And then Rachel gives his maidservant to Jacob for a wife, and she gives birth to Dan and Naphtali, or Naphtali, whichever your preference is. Then Leah's servant, Zilpah, gives birth to Gad and Asher, and then Leah has Issachar and Zebulun, and then Joseph, and then Benjamin as Rachel dies. So we're going to start seeing a focus on the 12 tribes of Israel in the coming scriptures, because this is the line of promise. Anybody remember which one of the sons Christ came through? Through the tribe of Judah. As I mentioned before, this is just gratuitous because I didn't want to be the only guy that didn't have colorful pictures in my presentation. So you'll see Manasseh, and we have the explanation later of the half tribe of Manasseh and all of that I want to get into this morning. But the idea is that this is where the 12 tribes of Israel reside. You see, they're surrounded by which nations? These are the nations of whom? Cain, Ishmael, and they have a influence on this nation, even though God has told Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that they would inherit this land. It does not come easy. It does not mean that they would not be having problems with the nations around them in wars and in influence to false gods. Chapter 36, tough reading, but it does give the generations of Esau, because we have Jacob and Esau as brothers. That's one we're going to skip over real quick. There are some interesting things to note in there, but not for our class period this morning. But generations of Esau, again, we have a situation where he has 3 different wives, and all of the nation of Esau, or as the name he is given, of Edom, the nation of Edom, and in fact they call him Edom. These are those that are born to him. Chapter 37. We start getting focus on, Joseph. So, who is Joseph? Which one? Okay. All right. So what's the attitude here? Does God let us know that in the Old Testament every family was perfectly adjusted and had no problems whatsoever? This is a recipe for how to disrupt your children and you have a dysfunctional family, is to give one child preference and to express that. Larry?
Joseph was his favorite son, Israel's favorite son, and then he had these dreams to compound it that he was going to rule over all of them. So it was not appreciated.
No, it was not appreciated. It was, in fact, true. There was, I guess, except for the point of diplomacy, there was no reason why he would not tell them, except that he was already on thin ice with his brothers. He has these dreams, and he tells them to his brothers. The dreams are what? There's at least 2 different dreams, right? Both of them represent his family bowing down to him. It's not just a dream, it turns out to be a prophecy. And we'll get to that later on, after I think Harry covered that in chapter 40 and beyond. So they take him and they do what to Joseph? You know, some of the brothers want to kill him. Some of them don't. Some of those details are in the scriptures and in the questions. But the idea here is that they make a profit on selling their brother into the slave trade. Does that mean that God condoned that because of what happens later? No. And keep that in mind. Just because it's recorded doesn't mean that that was God's plan or that he condoned the action. What it may show you is that no matter how bad man's decisions are, God can make something good come of it. So they go back and they tell Jacob what? He's dead. Well, where's his body? The animal ate it. And here's his robe of many colors soaked in blood to prove it.
I can't, it's kind of, a little bit detailish here, but they took it back and they said, "Have we found this? Do you know whether this is your son's tunic or not?" And Jacob, said, "It is my son's tunic, a wild beast has devoured him."
Right.
And, so without doubt, she's torn to pieces. And then Jacob went into mourning, and we often say, well, they went back and told him, "Hey, he's dead." They did not.
Right.
They deceived him. But let's don't skip the fine-tuned parts of the story here and understand what happened. Because when we paraphrase things like that, it can be misleading. And also here is a great example of Jacob believed a lie. Based a lot of decisions with this lie, off of a lie. And that we all could be deceived in that. But it still wasn't truth, but he believed it.
He believed or assumed and then believed that Joseph was dead and goes into mourning because of that. It's a very interesting story that won't get really thick until after chapter 39, so I'll leave that to Harry. Chapter 38. Yes, sir.
One thing that is notable in 37, and that is that before Reuben had not played the part of the elder brother that he should have, back in the incident with Dinah. Now, with his brother Joseph going to be killed, he tells the brothers, "No, let's not do that."
Right.
There's some growth, at least. He takes leadership to keep that from happening, but it's not enough to do what's right. He takes a leadership that in the end is going to be, deceptive and still doing what's wrong, of sending his brother into slavery, even though God used it for good.
You're right. It's we don't know exactly how much of personal character is required for Reuben to take the elder or the eldest brother leadership of the group, but he obviously did not do that and has somewhat of a scarred reputation from what he's done in the past. But you're right, he does at least make sure that they don't kill him.
One thing that, not that it excuses it, but it kind of helped to put it into maybe better reference. When you think about the situation with Jacob and Leah and Rachel and kind of that dynamic, and then giving a handmaid, giving the other handmaid, several of these are half brothers, and so you kind of got this portion from Leah, and this portion from Rachel, then from Zilpah, then from Bilhah. So like, it's not like our family here where it's like see him every day and we're interacting every day and like, oh, let's just kill him, boom, it's what it. Like there's the dynamics of, well, I'm from this mom and I don't really like you so much because you're from that mom and you're not even really, you're a handmaid's kid. So I mean that kind of I think plays a factor into it on top of yes, he favored him, gave him stuff. But.
Right. Yeah. In fact, You're absolutely right. We don't know what the dynamics were, but we do know that it was a mixed family. It was a blended family. Let's call it that. Isn't that what they call it today? Where we have the same father, but different mothers and different, maybe class isn't the right word, but different levels of whether they were actually a wife or a maid who became a wife. So Judah, we get to a little bit more of a focus in chapter 38 of Judah. This is another interesting series of events. Judah gets a wife, takes a wife. Got redirected on this last night. I talked to Harry, and he straightened it out for me. We do not know what this wife's name is. The English kind of fails us here. It seems to indicate that her name is Shua, but in fact, Shua is masculine in its name, so her father's name is Shua. We don't know what the daughter's name is. So in the genealogy list, you'll see that Judah has a wife, and from her comes Onan, and Shelah, but we don't actually know what her name is. So then Judah goes and gets a wife for her name is Tamar. There's some interesting things that go on here that we're going to skip over fairly quickly, but I believe this is worthy of read. Please read chapter 38 and understand what's going on here. Why do we focus on Judah? There's a focus on the tribe of Judah and the lineage and the goings-on in the tribe of Judah, because this is the lineage of Christ. So two of the sons, first and then Onan, are wicked before God, and they die. Then in a very interesting story that I still will not tell you I completely understand, Judah mistakes his daughter-in-law for a prostitute, goes into her, and by him she has twins. The eldest, Perez, or it's I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled a little bit differently depending upon your translation. That shows up in the lineage of Christ. So it shows Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and then Perez, who has sons after him. Scott?
Not only were and Onan did they die, it says the Lord killed them, which you would have to be pretty wicked for that to happen.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, directly, individually, this is the first time that happens, or at least that it's recorded for us in that clarity, that God found someone wicked specifically, and not through any way that's particularly described, says God took his life.
Add to that, God, of course, killed everybody, all the wicked people in God's world.
Right. We know that it's not the first time it happened, but specifically in this particular verbiage, I think this is the first time it just says it in that way. So in chapter 39, which is the last one, we'll get into the questions here for a little bit. God blesses Joseph, even though he's been taken into captivity by the Ishmaelites, or I guess Ishmaelites is a broader term. The Midianites is a more specific term of the travelers that he was sold to. Then he was sold to Potiphar. Who's Potiphar? Larry?
Potiphar, the Egyptian official, that was the keeper, I guess, the guards.
Yeah, captain of the guard, or right.
And I just to add to that, that's just, you keep thinking, well, why didn't Joseph try to explain what was going on? But guessing he didn't know the language, you know, he would sit down there and he had to learn the language. There'd be a time there where there'd be a weak period of adjustment, and he'd be at a disadvantage.
It's possible, having your captors as your second language may not have served him very well. On the other hand, Potiphar trusted him enough to give him what? Everything. Potiphar, being in charge of the Egyptian guard or army or whatever the case may be, put him in a position where he probably had a nice house, good possessions, and they were valuable. And yet he trusted Joseph in the care and taking responsibility of those, except for one thing. Of course, did not give his wife to him. Unfortunately, either because of the Egyptian culture or because of this particular woman who remains unnamed, she's wicked and tries to tempt Joseph. And what is his response? How could I? How could I? Chapter 39, verse 9. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So she finds a way of getting him in trouble anyway. I don't know what her intention was, but she lies about him, and Potiphar believes her. Joseph is thrown into prison. Then what? Scott?
Well, to go back, we got an example here that if you're in a place of authority and a man, you don't need to be alone with a woman. You know what I mean? There needs to be witnesses around or something.
Right.
You know, I mean, like if you're having an elders meeting or just whatever it might be, it's always best to have a third party around as a witness, you know.
Right. He may have had some or no control of that. We don't
Right.
know.
I'm not blaming.
But
I'm
you're
just
right.
saying an example.
It's an example.
You know, I just remembered something that kind of backs up why he might not know the language. When his brothers came down, he had to speak through an interpreter to talk to his brothers. So his brothers probably didn't know Egyptian
Yeah.
and had to. So he would have had to learn that language when he got there.
Harry, do we have any idea how long Joseph was in captivity in Egypt before this event with his family coming? Was it a short period of time? Okay. Well, he probably was there. He was obviously an intelligent man, capable maybe of learning the language well enough to get by, but now we see him in a position of authority in the prison. James?
Joseph, here he's talented. He has to be, because he was given charge of everything. Potiphar, I was looking up the description of him, and it says he was an executioner. One of the descriptions of him. So he had a big role in the government and carrying out some of the deeds were not very pleasant to deal with for Egypt. And here he was, now he's in control of his whole house. So he has control of everything. But God says that he was a handsome man. That, you know, not only was he talented, here he was handsome, and then Potiphar's wife had longing eyes after him. So we see that here's how sin acts. And you have to be responsible for yourself, and Joseph is from start to finish. He's a great example. That even in a situation you can't get out, he still held his ground as a godly young man with all these talents. He was a handsome man. He was obviously smart, intelligent, and had a lot of
It says that God blessed him with Potiphar and then blessed him later when he became in charge of the prisoners in the jail. We don't know how much blessing that is, but we see that despite being a godly man, bad things can happen to good people. Some things just happen to the people that you deal with, the situations that you're put in. Sometimes the situation is, as Scott mentioned, that you allow yourself to be put in. I don't want to get too far sidetracked, but I can tell you that I've had many conversations with young men and young teenage men, explaining to them that there are situations they need to stay out of. They need to prohibit themselves from being put in. And one of those is what Scott mentioned, is being alone with another woman.
And this wasn't a one-time thing. I mean, she was asking him day after day after day after day. And then I guess she got pretty aggressive here. So she pretty much grabbed a hold of him and said, lie with me, instead of like kind of teasing her. And he took off. I mean, so it kind of shows you also the reactions can be different. Those other instances, we don't know, but we know that as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed with her, to lie with her, to be with her. Maybe when he said no, she fled or something. But this was a different scenario. This one is one that he had to literally escape from.
Right.
And just reading this, I mean, all those times. I mean, I think it's more impressive that he didn't do it after all this time. It wasn't just one time. He took her down a lot.
Yeah. It's a habitual problem, day after day, he had to deal with. What does the New Testament tell us? Flee. One word, run. Get away from this situation so that you're not dragged down by it.
There are two themes that come together in this that seem pretty clear. One is that God's hand is behind all of this. We see what takes place and how this seems to us to be a bad thing or this a good thing. But God had something in mind. He didn't have to take away their will. He had a guiding control. And with regard to Joseph, God could not have possibly used, let's say, Simeon or Levi like this. He couldn't have used some of the others in this way because they hadn't shown the character. God ultimately can show his blessings and his hope for Israel by bringing Joseph not only to be brought to Egypt, but to progress because of his godliness, because of his goodness, his growth, his integrity to help in Potiphar's house. God uses him. And we need to ask ourselves, are we being the kind of person that God can use in his cause? And he had to have somebody like Joseph with that character in order to, in the end, save his people by producing this grain that would be there to sustain them and everything else. But to do all of that, to rise to the position he did, he had to have the character he did.
And that was it. That was God using the character and using the situation. All things come together for good. So one thing you have to be careful of when you take a look at situations like this is to never blame God or hold God responsible for the sin and evil of man. It doesn't mean that in these situations he can't take control of all of it, but he does not take away man's free will in any situation. So, because if you get too far down that road, then you start talking about how I've heard some people say that, well, Judas had to betray Christ, so it's not really Judas's fault. It's not the case at all. In fact, the scripture, I believe, says something to the effect of, evil will come, but woe to him by whom it comes. You have free will always. don't have free will, now we're getting into some Calvinism concepts. We need to walk away completely from that. You have the ability, anytime and anywhere, to change what you're doing. God knows that. The gospel teaches that. The free will of man, as we see throughout all of this, teaches us that. So I find it difficult sometimes when people excuse their sin by just saying, well, you know, it's just the one time I was caught up in it. No, you had 10 or 20 or 30,000 different opportunities to turn the other direction and walk away from that sin, and you chose to go forward with it. It wasn't once. It was every microsecond. Okay, all right. Joseph is in charge of the prisoners in the prison.
So, Curt, look at that then as a character study of Genesis 38 and 39 with Judah and with Joseph and how they both dealt with temptation.
Right.
So you have Judah then, temptation, he sins, he's more worried and concerned about how people feel about him and his sin than even God is. And then look at the character and what Joseph does and sees sin and runs. And so the people throw him in jail and he doesn't even sin.
Right.
And so we could really get deep in here about the character and what it means, and that bad things still may happen to us even though we have done nothing wrong in this earth. But we can stand before our God in judgment and still receive that promise, although we may be mistreated and abused.
Or even killed for the cause of Christ. Okay, all right. Let's. We can't go through these one by one. We don't have enough time. But for those of you who have filled out the spaces and all of that, are there any of them that gave you pause or gave you a little bit of trouble in filling them out? We're just going to open it up for, we have about 2 or 3 more minutes. Does anybody have one that they were found particularly difficult to find the answer on or found surprising when they went back and read through it? Come on now, you all have these, right? You filled out all your spots. Tyler?
Yeah, Janae had some issues with some that I think were good. One of them was the captain's Pharaoh's guard, number 8. I know that Potiphar was the captain, but it also says that when they put him in prison, they said that they put him in the in verse 3, 40. So he put them in custody in the house as a captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. I'm guessing there's multiple captains. I mean, I know there isn't, current, but when I was looking at it in the timeline of the questions, it looked like it was asking for that guy's name, who that was. But I'm assuming it's Potiphar because we don't even know what his captain's name was. But I just thought that was interesting. He wasn't the only captain of the guard.
Right, and we know that Pharaoh was not necessarily a person, it was a title. Was Potiphar perhaps the same? I don't know if that was his personal name or if that was a title. But you're right, the one on captain of Pharaoh's guard, the only reason why I wrote down what I did is that's what it says in chapter 39, verse 1. It says that Potiphar was an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian. So I think that's what the author was looking for. Maybe that doesn't tell us the whole story, but that's what I got. Anybody get anything different? Okay. Anybody else? All right, well, let's go to the extra, because we only have about a minute left. Joseph, different Joseph. We're jumping ahead several hundred years. Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus, was told in a dream, "Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt." What is that reference? Matthew 2? 13. Excellent. No more? Everybody got them all right? No problem? Easy? Okay.
I guess another comment, I guess I didn't know about this, but Joseph, his father's name was Jacob also, and so it's just kind of neat that they match up, Jacob and Joseph.
If you go back and study that, you're right. I found this one to be pretty interesting. I don't know, it comes directly from Luke chapter 3, so I know the names are correct. Whether or not it skips anybody in there, I'm not sure. But it's interesting to note that. Thanks for bringing that up. Class period is over. We're going to bring in all the kids, and then we'll have our regular worship service. Thanks for everybody for your participation.
When the world's all as it should be, blessed